the executive director of the Melissa Institute. As some of you know, for nearly 28 years, the Melissa Institute for Violence Prevention and Treatment has been a trusted source of scientific information on violence prevention, safety, safe communities, and mental health worldwide. Today, more than 60,000 people from over 130 countries have benefited from the Institute's educational resources and trainings. In addition, we frequently provide information on violence prevention and treatment to diverse organizations locally inside Florida and beyond. So if that's something that is of interest to you and your organization, please let us know. Before moving ahead with today's presentation, I would like to acknowledge the considerable fear, rage, and sorrow we are all going through as we prepare to talk about how to promote safety and success, student success in schools. The terrorist attacks on Israel was such a surprise on early Saturday morning. People are still gathering information, and every day we hear new stories about what happened. We're still learning about the full scale and scope of the horrific attacks of violence perpetrated against the people of Israel, and about the agony experienced by Palestinian citizens trapped in the war zone. The level of shock and grief is felt everywhere. We're also witnessing how shock and grief is turning into anger. At the Melissa Institute, our hearts are bleeding, and we are resolved to continue our efforts to promote safety, mental health, and peace in our communities and beyond. We ask that you do the same. So with that acknowledgement there of this particular moment in history, I want to just take a moment to thank Dr. Aurora Garmedia, District Chairperson of the Emotional and Behavioral Disability Clinical Services of Miami-Dade County, for reaching out to us and inviting us to collaborate in the creation of this training experience. I'd also like to thank Dr. Rose Alvarez and Dr. Amanda Alvarez from the Department of Psychology at Nicklaus Children's Hospital in Miami for the willingness to collaborate with us as local experts in the provision of services for children and adolescents. And of course, I want to thank Cristina Fonseca, the Melissa Institute Office Manager and Communications Coordinator, as well as Alexi McCauley, our Office Assistant, for doing all the magical things behind the scenes and make this work. And finally, I'd like to thank our Scientific Director, Founding Scientific Director, Don Meichenbaum, for taking us here into another trip of learning and growth. Today, we'll be talking about safety, mental health, and student success in schools. Don will lead us into the bulk of the conversation on this topic, and then we will be hopefully joined by Dr. Amanda Alvarez, a child and adolescent psychologist within the Department of Psychology at Nicklaus Children's Hospital, for a discussion of clinical material. Take it, Don.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and let me thank all of you for your attention and interest. And moreover, let me commend you on your good judgment in being here. As the school year begins, there's perhaps no more relevant topic than how do we make schools safe, how do we address the mental health needs, and how do we improve student success. I am now Zooming you from a place called Clarence Center, which is outside of Buffalo, where I live, except until January 3rd, when I get out of Buffalo and go to Florida and get involved more and more with the Melissa Institute. I need to let you know that in Cape Cod each summer, I give a workshop. And in fact, it's a 15-hour workshop, and I spend 5 hours on each of these 3 topics. I am going to attempt to condense those 5 hours into 3 essentially half-hour presentations, and then leave the last half hour for your questions, comments, and the like. I have put together an extensive handout. Actually, it's a portion of what I do for the 15 hours. Those 15 hours, if you're interested, will be occurring again next summer, and we do a hybrid, both Zoom and live presentations therein. So put on your seatbelt because I'm going to walk you through the state of the art in each of these topics. You each have access to the handout. And moreover, I have also put together a presentation that I'm going to be giving in December at the Evolutions Conference on how to spot hype in the field of psychotherapy, and moreover, how to spot hype in the field of trauma. It turns out that if you look at the field of psychotherapy, 25% of therapists get 50% better treatment outcomes and indeed have 50% fewer dropouts from therapy. I have recently put together 2 legacy type courses of 10 hours each that will soon be available via the Melissa Institute. And the goal of those presentations is how to increase the likelihood that both educators and clinicians will become a member of that 25% group. I'll have more to say about this topic of psychotherapeutic interventions a bit later on in the second half hour. Let's begin with the first topic of school safety. Now, you need to know that I am steeped in this topic, not only through the Melissa Institute, but I have 2 daughters who are educators, one of whom, my daughter Lauren, teaches in Canada. And in fact, she was the teacher of the year in Ontario for addressing issues of LGBTQ, which I'll comment on. The other's a high school teacher at a performing arts. I have a son who runs the autism program in Buffalo, and he does entire workshops on how to address the needs of autistic spectrum disorder kids and other high need kids and how to include them in there. His wife is a special ed teacher, really terrific and trained special ed teachers. And my sister is a school psychologist. So wherever I turn, the issue of school safety and common topics come up to play. So let's consider the nature of the challenges that you as educators and clinicians face. We know that the issue of safety, school violence, community violence, home violence is a prominent topic that needs to be addressed in terms of the impact that this has not only immediately, but over the course of the child's life. We also know that there is an impact on social climate on mental health. In fact, the American Psychological Association just came out with a review of all the literature on what these various kinds of natural disasters portend for the mental health of our individual children. And then there's the whole impact of what is poverty. And moreover, on top of all this, we have the aftermath of COVID. And in fact, one of the challenges that schools have is the high rate of absenteeism. So given all that as a backdrop, how shall we proceed? Here's an interesting question for you that I would like us to address. The government has set aside millions of dollars for improving school safety. If you were asked for your advice, how do you think we should spend all that money? Should we hire more policemen in schools? And moreover, what is it that those policemen should do that will increase the likelihood of safety? Various companies want us to buy various protective devices for schools in terms of more safety glasses, locks, and the like. Is that where you think the action lies? How would you contemplate that? Here's another analogy that I'd like to put before you, one that I've given a good deal of thought with the colleagues at the Melissa Institute. You know, in the immediate aftermath of various accidents, like an airplane accident, train derailment, other kinds of things, the first thing that they go to is they go to look for the black box, okay? What does the black box tell us? Was this pilot error? Was it weather conditions? Was it malfunctions of the airplane? I mean, we try to discern in the aftermath of such accidents lessons to be learned. So here's an interesting question, perhaps. What would the black box look like after every school shooting? You know, when there's a school shooting like Lanza and Newtown, or others like Uvalde and many others, we learn an awful lot about the characteristics and background of the perpetrator, their developmental history, their family circumstance, how did they get the guns, and so forth. But we fail to learn a lot about what the school did or did not do in identifying that perpetrator as high risk. What did the school do in trying to connect that child in terms of school connectedness? What did that school do with regard to engaging families? What does the school do in terms of bully prevention? What is it that you put in the black box that's ecological that would be relevant? How should we spend our money? You know, there are a number of intervention programs that I include in the handout that schools have embraced. Now, as we consider this topic, I'd like us to entertain the notion that there are 3 levels of interventions. We could do things at the school-wide level, kind of a primary prevention where all students in the school are exposed to or receive the same kind of interventions. So that these might be, for example, the program by Castle on emotional learning that all students receive in that particular program. It may be that the school has set up a code of honor, a mission statement, that the teachers have been provided various kinds of interventions in terms of bully prevention and the like. But one of the things we also have learned from the literature that's relevant as to where we're going in this presentation is that it's not only should it be universal, okay, but that we need secondary intervention, that the children who are, the students who are high risk, that those kinds of widespread school-wide interventions are often insufficient, and therefore we need a kind of backup selected strategy of where particular students could need and benefit from some kind of specific interventions, many of which are cognitive behavioral that we'll come to see and that I'm going to demonstrate for you in a moment. And then finally, there are students who are coming in to our classrooms who warrant even more wraparound services, a kind of, not only are they indicated, but the school and the community, and in collaboration with the mental health community attached to the school, need to provide this kind of tertiary interventions. So therefore, there's no one fix across each of these interventions. I have no magic formula or algorithm to give you per se that highlights it. But there is one common denominator that cuts across what we know is most effective in not only making schools safer, but as a way of bolstering resilience. Now, I'm going to walk you through a number of interventions, some of which actually backfire and should be avoided, and some of which have been evidence-based that work. And you'll see an enumeration in this in your handout. The other thing is I want you to know that the material that I'm going to cover with you is only the tip of the iceberg. That if you go to the Melissa Institute, www.melissainstitute.org, you will find supplemental handouts by both me and my colleagues. And you need to keep in mind that everything on the Melissa Institute, like this presentation, is free. Our mission is to sort of give science away, and hopefully we'll address your needs. In fact, if you go to Meichenbaum, Donald, Melissa Institute and Google that, you will get a good deal of the more detailed handouts and presentations therein. We have included on that website a list of collaborators, the scientific board of the Melissa Institute, who I'm going to share their knowledge and experience with. One of these is a colleague named Ron Slaby, who not only is part of the Melissa Institute, but has done things at the national level. So in fact, on page 3 of your handout, if we can go to that, Christina, we could point out there how people can go to that bottom linkage. And let's show the audience what Slaby has put together as a model of where relationships, if you're going to put the $400 million to thing, what is it that we know that helps create a safe environment? In fact, if you go to the Secret Service account on school violence, one of the things you will find that there are some 67 cases of where there was planned violence. And the way in which they stopped it ahead of time was in some kind of peer nomination. That is, the students had a relationship with the authorities and the cops there who have specially established relationships with students so that they could feel that they were able to share. You know, if you want to know which students are high risk for engaging in violent behaviors, it turns out that peer nominations, as I'm going to describe after we look at those videos, is in fact one of the best cases. So let me set the stage by just sharing with you a few of the Slaby tapes, and then we'll come back and have an opportunity to discuss that in more detail. So Christina, if we could turn that set of videos on.
Good job, Shannon. Good job, Cams. You're awesome. Good job, guys.
My name is Marnie Milliard. I am the principal of Goodnight Pre-K-8 School.
All day, babe. All day.
About 63% free or reduced lunch students, and about 58% of our students are minority. Just very eclectic, and it makes for a really nice climate and culture here. It's a really, really nice little school, big school. PBIS means Positive Behavior Intervention Support, and it's really focused on positive behavior. You're supposed to give 4 to 5 positive remarks for every 1 negative remark that you give to a student. So it really turned it around for us. You know, instead of a teacher always saying, no, don't do that, or, you know, sit down, we turn it around and we focus on what's positive.
Matthew, I love the way you came into the classroom. You were showing pride. You came down, sat down, you were doing the right thing, sitting cross-legged. I love it. Thank you for coming in so nicely after PE.
In the hallway, you'll hear us saying, please walk, you know, or make sure you walk, instead of don't run, or no, don't do that. Instead, we talk about, we point out who's doing well, who's doing the right thing.
Discipline, sort of the connotation that people have with that is that it's negative and that it's punitive in some way. PBIS, to us, it's a change of paradigm. And in schools where we're implementing our PBIS with fidelity, we've seen some fantastic changes in our data.
Each office discipline referral can take, 15 minutes. If you've got schools that have 1,500 office discipline referrals, multiply that by 15 minutes, multiply that by 45 minutes. You're taking away from all of that instructional time and dealing with behavior problems.
If you put these structures in place, you will end up spending less time on discipline issues, a lot less time on discipline issues. We cut our discipline referrals in half. In half. We had no suspensions last year, 0. For a very large school like this, that's pretty incredible. I think what really worked for us is we were able to go to a training with parents, and from that moment on, we had buy-in. At that training, they told us to create our acronym. We had to create what we really stood for here at Goodnight School. And it was so much fun to do that with parents involved. Prepared, respect, integrity, disciplined, excellence. That's our acronym, PRIDE.
At Goodnight, we have been exhibiting pride throughout the entire school year. We show pride in the classroom. We show pride where else?
At the media center.
In the media center. Very good. Where else?
What we really love about it too is that it provided a common language for our school, not only for our students, not only for our families, but our teachers as well. PBIS is really based on what the teachers are doing. And I think that's why it's so successful here, is because it's really led by teachers. They see that it works, they see that it's making a difference. And so that is what has helped make the change here at our school.
But is it just one day out of the week, or how many days out of the week?
Every day.
Every day out of the week, and we're all in this together.
Okay, I'm going to just show you one more in terms of how to change school climate and the like. And then I'll walk you through some of the materials that we have. So, Christina, let's go to one of the police videos.
My name's Janae Luttrell, and I was the fortunate candidate to be the project director here in Grossmont Union High School District. I was hired shortly after we had 2 high-profile shootings at 2 of our schools. Sometimes we had racial tensions. We also had students who were involved in gang violence, both on campus and in the community. The violence that we were experiencing in our classrooms was connected to bigger things, but we didn't always look at it that way. And once we started looking at it that way, that helped us get more creative of what we should do to address it. So we created a program called Camp Lead. And that's an experiential program where we take about 100 students at a time. We take them up to camp with their teachers, with their principals, with their community partners, such as law enforcement. And the students would have a chance to get to know those adults, and the adults would get a chance to know the students as people.
So at Camp Lead, it was a 3-day camp, and we would go up away from school, away from the city, and just kind of go up on these remote areas, and we would really build a strong bond with the students that were there. I think one of the first activities we do is called Cross the Line, where a series of questions are asked. Did one of your parents die before middle school? Cross the line. People cross the line, you kind of see like, wow, like no matter how they look, you don't know what they're going through, what their life is kind of like.
It's very transformative to realize that person who I had all these assumptions about, he and I have the same experience. Both of our fathers are in prison, or both of our mothers have lost their jobs. And so now all of a sudden, you got a chance to realize that yes, you have differences, and that's okay, but we have a lot more in common.
Christina?
My lieutenant came in to briefing, and he said, hey.
Christina, can you flip just to give a sample of the police thing, and then we'll stop it. So, in fact, you, the audience, can go to this website, and on here are at least a dozen other examples of schools across the country that have implemented various kinds of programs with regard to reducing violence. I'll just give you one more example, and then we'll talk about various kinds of specific interventions.
Good morning, how y'all? Good morning. Y'all having drama with somebody earlier? Around the corner? Where? Around there? Yeah. Who's messing with y'all?
Vern Wilson, I'm school liaison officer at Sam Houston Middle School. I'm with the Emerald Police Department.
Well, look who's here.
Get here a little before 8 o'clock. I'll hang out in the front or wherever, talking to the kids, feeling how the day is gonna go, because sometimes you can tell if this group is a little edgy or another group's a little edgy and there might be a problem, and just try to get the feel for the kids for the day.
The school liaison officer is a police officer that's assigned to work inside the school. And I think we let the kids and sometimes the teachers and principals and others inside the school get to see police officers in a different light. You know, we don't drive around in black and white police cars. We're not stopping people and writing them speeding tickets. We're kind of interacting with them on a more personal level.
So you just here for one class, man? Mr. Donahue, what's your story?
Our liaison officers establish relationships with our kids. They're not just patrolling the halls, and this is a sea of faceless, nameless kids. They know their names, they know how they're doing, they know if they're getting into trouble. So when there is a bullying issue that comes up, they can talk to them about it. And a lot of times you'll hear them talking the kids' language, saying, come on, man, you know, you're better than this, you know better than this.
Okay,
Same thing goes
Christina.
with substance abuse. Our liaison.
So I just want to give you a flavor of the kind of model examples that have been implemented across the country in order to address the notion of relationships. You know, it's interesting to note that this particular month is actually a National Principal Month. And nothing really happens in schools unless you can actually get the leadership of national principals. So in fact, we have available on the Melissa Institute a website on what we call a principal report card. In fact, the Wallace Foundation has recently done a study of principals. And what they've done is enumerate a variety of behaviors that effective principals engage in. So what they did was evaluate principals who score 75% or higher on this kind of checklist versus those principals who score 25% or less. And it turns out that in the schools where the principals score high on this kind of report card, the students in their school improve both in math and reading by 3 months per semester. That's a remarkable improvement. So what is it that your principal, and you could start to think about this if you're working in the school system. So one of the characteristics of these high-performing principals is that they were able to engage their teachers in instructional guidance and discussion. That the principal was able to create a positive school climate. That apropos of what we saw in the other principals, they were able to engage in a variety of interventions, like the positive behavioral interventions. They were able to wear a kind of equity lens in their approach towards students of various kinds of minority populations. They were able to mobilize resources in order to meet the basic needs that come with the parallel issue with regard to poverty and the like. So one of the things that I think is critical in terms of these kinds of academic performances has to do with regard to what we know in terms of school readiness and the like. So, for example, one of the challenges we have as educators is to address the needs of children who come from poverty. In our own research, we've been able to identify that students from poverty or other impoverished kinds of environments enter school with approximately 2,000 vocabulary words behind their middle class and upper class kind of fellow students. And as you will see, reading comprehension is a critical skill. In fact, if you can get students to read by grade 3, they rarely, if ever, get in trouble with the law. Let me say that again. If you can get students to read at that level by grade 3, it has a significant predictive value on who's going to graduate high school. And in fact, you can go to the Melissa Institute, because we've taken this on as a challenge. And what you will find on the Melissa Institute are 500 free movies of the best teachers in Toronto, Mississippi, and Hialeah, Florida, who get positive outcomes. And you can access that reading literacy for free and see how teachers actually read stories, ask questions, arrange their rooms, and the like. And it's not that it's reading per se, but if children have difficulty reading, for instance, they have more behavior problems. And when they have more behavior problems, they end up being put into special classrooms. And moreover, if they get sent to the principal's office, okay, for various kinds of direction and the like, then one of the things that becomes interesting is that they have a greater likelihood of dropping out of high school. In fact, some people have estimated that if you know the reading comprehension level of all the students in your school by grade 3, you could predict the number who are going to graduate. This is not a throwaway statistic. Let me give you some example that when I present to politicians, one of the things I note for them is that every student who graduates high school over the course of their life are likely to make approximately $500,000. And they're going to pay taxes on that $500,000. Every student who does not graduate high school, who for one reason or another gets suspended and the like, one of the things that becomes evident for them is they're only going to make $250,000 over the course of their lives. So what I do is I challenge the politician. You go to the back door of your high school, and every kid who's suspended and who doesn't graduate, you go, 250 lost, another 250 lost, another 250 lost. In fact, California has lost $1.8 billion by not graduating students. In fact, engaging in some kind of preventative activities of making school climates go better, of improving principals' behavior, actually is a financially wise investment. It's better than Bitcoins or anything else you can invest in. How do we reduce violence in the school? Okay. Well, one of the things that we do is we try to create a social climate that is able to identify high-risk children. In fact, there's a kind of clever measure that we've used called the class play measure. I'll just highlight that as an example. We go into a school and we say, hey guys, I came across something kind of interesting. I think you find it fun, you know. So what I've done is, the teacher, is I put a list of all the boys on one list and all the girls on the other. And what I want you to do is play the game of that you're a director of a play or a movie. Now, one of the things that's really neat about being a director of a play or movie is that you get to choose who plays what part. Okay, you ready for this, guys? Okay, so here goes, okay? So what I'm going to do is read out a particular role that we have to fill, and you tell me, who do you think would be really good to play that role? Okay, you ready? You're going to have a party, and you want to invite a boy or girl who's going to come there who will be really good fun. Okay, great. Okay, I need a role of someone who, if kids are missing something in school because they're absent, who would they go to for help? Okay, give me, right? Here's another tough role. Okay, I need someone who might play the role of a bully. who sort of picks on other kids. Who you get the flavor of the way in which this is used to have peer nominations. Under the relationship of where they take the cop out with the kids for a camp. The cop comes as a person, tells his story. It's all about relationships, okay? And you're going to see how critical this is in the therapeutic mode as well. But some children need more supports than this. In fact, one of the things that we know that really is a preventative factor is the degree to which kids have a sense of connectedness to schools. So over and above the class play, one of the questions I regularly ask my students is the following. I say to them, let me ask you something a bit different, a bit unusual. If you were absent from school, who besides your friends would notice that you're missing and would miss you? That's a kind of clever question. If you were absent from school, who besides your friends would notice that you're missing and would miss you? If you had trouble in school, who would you turn to for help? I want to know in my black box the degree to which we have instituted and assessed on a regular basis the degree of school connectedness, the degree to which we've monitored the level of absenteeism, the degree to which we've been able to engage the parents as part of the process. What kinds of school-wide interventions, and for those kids who need special interventions, a number of cognitive behavioral techniques have been employed. In fact, my colleague, Lee Ogmiere, has developed a very effective program called SNAP. SNAP, okay? This is Stop Now and Plan. Christina, could we show a bit of Ogmiere's video of SNAP?
We teach the kids and the parents stop techniques, putting your hands in your pockets, taking deep breaths, and we also teach plans, making a good choice to make your problem smaller, not bigger. And we basically help them with their emotion regulation, problem solving, self-control. Our success rate here at YCC with the SNAP program is well over 80%. We work on kids from ages 6 and 11. The program is free. We provide dinner. We do provide childcare. We also provide free transportation if you need it.
I have two boys. They're 12 and 10 years old. They had a lot of problems with talking back and raging, beating on each other. They would break things around the house, getting in fights at school. And I was looking for like an anger management, something to help them stop and think about what they're doing and make better decisions. And this is the perfect program for that.
It makes me feel good now because I can sit down and have a conversation without being angry and having an attitude with someone.
It's been great. We also have a parent meeting. In the parent group, we get to learn the same methods, which really helps because modeling it for our children is very important. It gives them a chance to see that we're working on our attitudes and our anger because none of us are perfect parents. So it's been a really great experience, and just knowing that you're not the only one dealing with these issues is great.
I think
Okay, Christina. So once again, I apologize. Remember, I take 5 hours on each of these topics, and I just wanted you to get a sense of the way in which these materials are available that you could follow up on from the Melissa Institute. Here's the most impressive findings that Ogmiere and others have demonstrated. So what she does is she actually teaches young children, this is the selected kind of intervention, of identifying what are particular triggers, either external or internal cues that individuals engage in that indicates that they're getting angry. And moreover, what is it that leads them to become more aggressive They need the attributions of intentionality. They need to think that these accidents that occur, the rough and tumble play, were on purpose. So the impressive thing that Ogmieri has, and you can read about this on the Melissa Institute, is she actually teaches the kids how to snap and how to talk to themselves in a self-instructional way of how to stop now and plan. Now, she's done this over extensive training with kids, and she has now done MRIs, of children who have undergone this kind of extensive program. And what she finds therein is that there are actually changes in the structure and function of the brain, that there are neurological sequelae from this kind of emotion regulation kinds of skills. So one of the things that becomes really interesting is we have had people who intervene at all levels, at the school-wide level. For instance, Deb Pepler has created a bystander intervention that stops bullying along the way. She actually gives the students a map of the school and has them draw in what are the kinds of high-risk areas that should be avoided, where teachers should spend their time. And she finds that within 20 seconds, she could stop a bully incident. In fact, the Melissa Institute has a second website called Teach Safe Schools. You want to flash that one, Christina? And if you go to the website, Teach Safe Schools, you will be able to see the variety of interventions at the school-wide level, how to create a mission statement, how to create a code of conduct, how to train teachers on how to identify bullying and intervene accordingly, how to do the principal tape, and as we'll see in a later portion of this presentation, how teachers can engage parents in a more regular basis. It sort of takes a village to make schools safer. And therefore, what I'm doing is I'm talking about various levels of interventions at each of these approaches. One other colleague that I want to draw to your attention, this is the literacy website where there are 500 free movies on how to be an expert teacher, how to assess the level of vocabulary, how to improve metacognitive self-instructional program, and therefore you could access this. Remember that these kids are coming in with 200 words deficits. In fact, when I present to teachers, one of the things that I do is I give them the following analogy or example. That's fine, Christina, that will give them a flavor of the kind of resources that are there. If you could find the Teach Safe School website and just flash that, that will also indicate the degree to which there are supplemental procedures in that domain. This is the Teach Safe School program. There's a literacy component, and then there's on the top here, as you go along, if you click on any of these kinds of things, you can click on one of them, Christina, and each of these have a kind of linkage that you can go to. And we spent a lot of time. It's interesting that our literacy thing is now being used for teacher training in a variety of domains. So if you click on any one of these, it'll take you to a kind of how-to, and you can evaluate your school relative to these evidence-based interventions. Thank you, Christina. So this is an example that I give when I present to teachers. I say to them, can you imagine for a moment the following? Imagine that a child comes to your school and for whatever reason, he or she is confined to a wheelchair. And you, the educator, have a certain kind of expectations or demands that students should be able to engage in. And one of the things that becomes interesting is you say, look, you've been coming late to school for a number of times, okay? You say to the child in the wheelchair. So look, I don't want any excuses or any lip. You just get that wheelchair up those 4 stairs, okay? And I'll be waiting for you on the top. And you go, Well, maybe I, the educator, have a deficit because I have not provided you, the student, with a ramp to get your wheelchair up there. I, the educator, have not provided you with a stick that you could use to run the elevator. In the bathroom, I, the educator, have not provided you with bars to help. The shoes that you have are complicated shoelaces, not Velcro. So we, as educators, provide kids with physical ramps to negotiate our school, to be successful. Now, here's the analogy. Imagine that you have students coming to school who look normal. They're not confined to a wheelchair, but they have been through a variety of adverse childhood experiences, what we saw earlier in the boundary condition. So they've been some ways victimized by physical or sexual abuse, by neglect, by being a victim of a bullying, of living in a high-risk environment, of coming from a dysfunctional family and the like. And when we look at these children who look normal, it's important to realize that the research indicates that there are neurological and psychosocial sequelae of having come on with that kind of environment. That, in fact, the left side of their brain is slightly lower than the right side of the brain in terms of activation. That there are neurological sequelae of these kids having a shorter fuse of their lower brainstem, of the amygdala and hippocampus hijacking their frontal lobe. So this is the question I ask of those teachers. What kinds of mental ramps do you think these children who look normal need? What are the kind of metacognitive prosthetic devices? I'll talk about this in my last half hour. Okay. Do we need to address? What are the kinds of emotion regulation and attentional and memorial kinds of prompts and supports they need? And you will see that I have included in the handout a variety of interventions that teachers can do before, during, and after. You know, it's not a matter of having a skills training program like the SNAP program. The whole name of the game, as you'll see in the handout that I'll address, is how do we get generalization? How do we increase the likelihood? How do we increase the likelihood that students will use these procedures in other domains? You know, we as educators have the potential of actually making things worse. There are a variety of interventions. Let me give you just one quick example of this. A clinician had done training on what is called dialectical behavior therapy with adults who have various kinds of problems with personality and emotion regulation, self-injurious behaviors, and the like. This was an intervention developed by Marshall Linehan. It's a kind of skills training program. And it's kind of intensive and involves both clinical problem attention as well as teaching various kinds of distress tolerance and emotion regulation, self-soothing, and other mindfulness kinds of activities. So well-intentioned educators and clinicians figured, hey, I know what we need. We're going to create a similar program like this, let's say of eight or so training sessions, and we're going to give it to high school students, those who we think are high risk for dysregulation. So they developed what is called a WISE Teen program, which is a watered down version of the dialectical behavior therapy, and they administered it. And what did they find? They found out that exposing these students to this kind of well-intentioned training program increased the level of anxiety and depression, and actually boomeranged and backfired. In fact, in your hype article, I have included, and I really encourage you to read it, a variety of school-based interventions of mindfulness training, tapping, of EMDR, of a variety of other kinds of skills that actually make things worse. I've included in your handout a whole series of programs that have been found to escalate the level of violence. So there are school systems who have set up special programs for those kids of most behavioral problems. And they send all of these kids to the same center to be treated. Well, it turns out that putting kids who are high risk together in the same classrooms, of bringing them all together in the same group, actually aggregates them and increases the likelihood of violence. You see, we as educators as well as clinicians have the potential of making things worse. And I invite you to take a look at the list on pages 7 of your handout that look at the variety of interventions that should be avoided. I'm not going to take time now when I have the 5 hours for each topic. I can go and walk you through this. And then you can go to page 9 of the handout and see the list of programs that have some evidence-based, that have some promise in terms of the interventions. Well, actually, my discussion of school violence here only has one last additional item to add, and then I'm going to turn to the mental health issues. My colleague, Jim Lawson, has made a demonstration modeling film that I worked on with him on how to take an angry youth and turn him into a social problem solver. That is, imagine that you are a principal or vice principal or a school counselor, and someone gets sent to you for the nth time because of their disruptive behaviors. So the question is, how do you engage them in the art of questioning? See, I think the most valuable tool you as an educator have, or you as a clinician have, is the art of questioning. So in fact, I have included on page 14 of your handout the best kinds of what and how questions you could ask of students, especially high school students, to engage them in this kind of process. What am I saying? The Melissa Institute has made a commitment to try to make schools safer, to improve academic performance. And I hope that I am introducing you to all of these kinds of resources and tools. We know in the field of psychotherapy that the quality and nature of the therapeutic alliance is 3 to 4 times more important than is the specific intervention that you use in therapy. That when we look at that 25% of therapists who get the best results, they not only establish, maintain, but they also monitor on a regular basis with their students and significant others on a session-by-session basis, the quality and nature of the therapeutic alliance. And that turns out to be the most important and productive element in therapeutic outcomes. Another aspect of what characterizes that 25% is that they have a case conceptualization model that informs and engages their patients. So Christine, if you would kindly turn to page 18, I would like to work people through the kind of model that we have developed therapeutically. So I'm going to talk briefly about 3 kinds of interventions, populations. One are those children who have externalizing problems, like ADHD and oppositional behaviors or aggressive kinds of behaviors. The second I'm going to talk about is students who are high risk for anxiety and depressive disorders, and those who have experienced traumatic events that have a lingering impact. Before I walk you through sort of the materials I presented here and that are online that you can go to further, I want to share with you the case conceptualization model, I was asked by the clinical group that attending this to look at various case studies. And I am going to comment as to how I read each of those case studies. So I have a very audacious claim to make now. I am going to suggest to the clinicians and to you, the educators, that these 9 boxes is your entire professional career. That there is absolutely nothing that you do for a living that I cannot code on these 9 boxes. So I'm going to take the next 10 minutes and walk you through this, and then have you appreciate the clinical implications this has when you do IEPs, when you discuss high-risk students with your colleagues and their parents and with the student. I'm going to highlight the way in which case conferences should be done, the way in which progress notes should be maintained, and the way in which, most importantly, educators and clinicians can communicate with each other and identifying the next steps. What should be the goals of their interventions? How could we have a homeschool clinical communication system? Remember, I need to have interventions not only at the universal or school-wide level, or in those that are selected who will come out and be candidates for the kind of treatment procedures like SNAP, like the videos that Lars and his colleagues have made on how to turn an angry youth into a social problem solver. I want to put before you for your consideration this particular model. So let me start with box 1. So what is box 1? Box 1 starts off with what is the background information on the students that we are now talking about. What are the variety of background factors? Starting off, for example, with regard to the age, gender, sexual identity, family constellation, cultural and racial background, okay? What is the nature of the various kinds of zip codes? What does that tell us about the community that they're coming from, okay? In fact, you'll see that these 9 boxes represent the kind of risk and protective factors model. So I want to know, tell me something about these students. And in the reports that I have received from the clinical, they actually do a good job in identifying 1A. The second kind of thing that occurs that's important is, how did the student come into my office now? Okay, how are they there of their own volition? Do they see that they have a problem, that there's some way engaging there, or are they being sent there because their teacher, their principal, their parents are telling them? Are they mandated to come? How am I going to engage my student that I'm seeing as a collaborator? How am I going to use motivational interviewing and guided discovery? How am I going to use my own curiosity as a clinician, as the educator, to try and understand what's going on? So I'm not seen just as another adult who's there to punish them. You know, remember that the therapeutic alliance is the most important element. So I need to have some way from the outset to connect with them. And then I need to go to box 2. So what is box 2? Okay, box 2 is what's getting you here. What's the nature of the presenting problem? You bolted from school, you hit someone else, you're bullied, okay, you have suicidal ideation, okay, you've engaged in some kind of self-injurious behavior, you cursed out, you think, I need to find out what is the nature of the 2A. Help me understand what is it that got you sent here this time, okay? And moreover, I want to do a situational analysis of this. I want to do a functional analysis of it. I want to walk in your shoes. In fact, one of the tools that I use is what is called a timeline. I say to the student, I say to my client, when were you born? Okay, and this is the time now. Can I take a moment? Can you give me can you share with me the sequence by which you got into these kinds of difficulties? So in the amalgam that I had, I had clients, they presented me with cases of students who were diagnosed with a whole amalgam of various kinds of problems, of borderline, of depression, of ADHD, and so forth. It's really valuable in terms of developing treatment goals to understand the sequence of these kinds of behaviors. And moreover, it's important to ascertain, how does this interfere with your functioning? Do you have friends, and who are those friends? Are they similar kind of aggregates of kids who have similar problems? Is there any kind of way in which you have a particular goal that your behavior is getting in the way of? And in about 80% of the cases, there's also co-occurring disorders. It's rarely likely that students only have one. The cases have, not only are they anxious and depressed, not only do they have PTSD, but they also have substance abuse. And this is all going to be important in our figuring out what should be the nature of the intervention. And moreover, I need to ascertain, in terms of box 4, what kinds of stresses are you living with? You, the student, okay? The students who's presenting, I, the principal, I, the educator, I, the clinician, and your family. What are the kinds of day-to-day hassles? Where do you live? How do you get to school? Is it safe? Okay. What's the kind of physical or medical kinds of problems that you have? And where do you live? Is that a high-risk area? Is there a lot of dysfunction in the family? Okay. And are you living with that? How do I walk in your shoes, my student, to understand what is it that's behind the nature? What's the root causes behind the nature of the presenting problems that are here? Remember that my compassion, my active listening, my empathy, okay, my curiosity as an educator and as a therapist are going to be my most valuable skills. And if I can understand more about your background, your ability to connect with other people. Remember my questions: when you're absent from school, who misses you? What's the nature of your genogram? I really want to understand you, okay? And moreover, what kinds of interventions have you received in the past? And the clinical reports that I got are remarkable in terms of the variety of interventions, including medications, that our clients have received. And have any of those particular interventions been successful? Did you have difficulty following through with taking the pills and going to the sessions? You're an expert in treatments. You've been through so many with so many. Is there anyone who stands out who was particularly helpful that you were able to connect with? If you make suggestions about what previous treatments, what they should have done, what did they miss? What's the unfinished business? What am I doing? I'm challenging you, the educator, you, the clinician, to develop the artfulness of probing in order to get boxes 1 to 5. But here's the kicker. You need to also be resilient oriented. You need the rest of the story. You need timeline 2 of what your students, your clients have going for them. What's the redeeming feature? You cannot come to present the case to me without you having box 6, okay? And what is box 6? Box 6 is the rest of the story. What are the particular interests, strengths, and potential sources? What are the islands of competence? What's the redeeming features of this student? What is it that's going to give both the student and me hope? What should our treatment goals be? They presented me with 6 detailed cases. Let me tell you that when I read these cases, okay, I am constantly looking for box 6, okay? My job is to nurture hope. Let me tell you what these 6 students bring. One student brings the notion that they had a special paternal relationship with their grandfather. That's a gold mine opportunity. What did the students see in their grandfather that made the relation? What is it that led them to have some kind of positive relationship? Moreover, what did the grandfather see in them? And if the grandfather was here sitting in an empty chair, what advice would he have? You want another thing that blows your mind? They had a case of an unbelievably disruptive student, okay? Who loves math? He loves math. Could you, I mean, he hooks up with this. First thing I'm doing is I'm meeting the math teacher, okay? I'm asking the kid about how did he choose math, okay? I have another student there who has a boyfriend. What does she see in the boyfriend? What does the boyfriend see in her? Okay? I have someone there who is feeding animals, okay? I have someone there who feels better after smoking marijuana. From my point of view, and I train clinicians, you cannot present these cases unless you bring to the table box 6. I need to know what individual, social, and systemic strengths we can build upon. I don't want just some kind of acronym-based therapy procedure that's filled with hype that I'm going to do. What are the nature of the relationships that you could build upon? Not only that, you can now ask and say, if I understand what's going on that brought you here that's having difficulty, and you could summarize the risk factors, but then you could say, on the other hand, it also seems that you have X, Y, and Z going on, if indeed that's the case. And then you can engage the client in saying, where and how should we spend our time? What is it that we should do in the course of the therapeutic process? And moreover, how would we know if we're making progress? You know, I say to the people I work with, look, I work with a lot of kids like yourself, okay? And let me tell you what I do for a living. It's not really that complicated, you know? I sort of say, how are things going on right now in your life? And moreover, how would you like them to be? Okay? What have you done to try and get that goal? Okay? What will we see change if in fact you actually made some, what would other people notice about what's going on? And do you have any kind of future orientation of where you're going? And let me ask one last question. Can you foresee, can you envision anything that might get in the way of it? So now box 9. What have I done? I have presented to you for your consideration a case conceptualization. And keep in mind that you can't come to the table without box 6. I'm a cognitive behavior therapist, and I often wonder, what is it about cognitive behavior therapy that seems to make it work? And my tongue-in-cheek answer is that one of the major things that I think makes therapists fall into that 25% group is that they refuse to be depressed. There is no kid, no student, no client that I cannot help identify specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, valued, and timely goals. My goal is to establish some connection with the kid, and I need to ask him, how can I be of help? How do I help you get to that goal? Now, everything I just said is not only in my head, but can also be shared with the client. So if you go to the next page there, Christina. So on the next page, everything that I just said to you is written out there. So I could say to you, Don, given the kind of problems that you're having in your life, let me understand how things are going right now. And how did you come to the decision to come in at this help? And how long has this been going on? And the impact of this on a day-to-day basis is, and in addition, and every time you hear me say in addition, you now know I'm working box on comorbidity, box 3. And this seems to be maintained and made worse by, well, nicely done, Don, going down to the next box. And for this, you receive what kinds of treatments? You have been suspended, you've done what? And the impact of that was, and the things you like, and in spite of, and every time you hear me say to a client, in spite of, you now know I'm working box 6. Go back to the boxes, Christina, the previous page, if you would. Okay. So I refer my student to you, the mental health worker, right? And you see this student and you close the door and you come out. And I want to know, how did you spend your time? What is it that you, the clinicians, did in that session? And you say either to your colleague or to the educator, I'm really glad you asked, okay? Because this particular session was a 2A, 4B, 6A session. You did what? I did 2A, 4B, 6A. Really, that's why I spent my time. You see, you can now use these 9 boxes to communicate, not only to the client, but to your colleagues, to their family members, to the educators. How do we get the teacher who is referred to depressed, suicidal to the clinician? And how does the teacher learn, what did you do as a clinician? What are the treatment goals and how can I supplement them? How do you, the educator and mental health worker, work in a collaborative model that fits this particular perspective? I'd invite you to try on this and to note how you, the school, and the mental health worker could work as a team. So if the clinician finds out that this kid loves to do math, okay, how do you team up to find out what is it this kid found attractive in doing that? That's an anomalous kind of thing. You cannot come to the table without box 6, without some way of nurturing hope. Remember that the quality and nature of your therapeutic alliance, either as a supportive teacher or as a clinician, is the glue. That is the healing process. Relationships, relationships, relationships are the key. Okay, let me go back, if I may, and now consider, with the help of Christina, back to page 4. So what's on page 4? So here's an interesting question. How do you make a violent youth? How do you engage? What's the developmental trajectory of someone who grows up and becomes a school shooter? How do you make an aggressive individual? What do we know? And in fact, what I'm doing here on this page is going to walk you through very quickly the kind of cascade model. And then if I walk you through this, as I do so, I want you to consider, what are the implications that we as a society can do to reduce this kind of troubled behavior? Now, note there are different kinds of aggressive behaviors. There are those that are reactive. You know, someone has, in some sense, done something, pushed your button, called you a name, slighted you in some way that had some kind of perceived provocation or threat. And this is a kind of reactive aggression. But there's another kind of aggressive behavior, as we know, which is instrumental. This is where it's goal-oriented, whereby you have a goal of hurting others, of revenge, of stealing a property, of saving face, of whatever. And therefore, these two kinds of aggression may, in fact, be overlapping and be relevant during the course of our understanding. So one of the things we know is that there is a genetic variability in terms of the likelihood of being aggressive. That kids come out with different kinds of temperaments and problematic kinds of aspects in this. And moreover, that kind of genetic may be the environment, that is the mother smoked or drank drugs during pregnancy and the like. And moreover, that they're growing up in an adverse childhood experiences, and that this puts them at certain kinds of developmental risk factors. In fact, children who are the offspring of clinically depressed mothers are most high risk. Now, for whatever reason, they lack the kind of school readiness in terms of preparedness, in terms of how well they come into school prepared to learn and the like, to follow instructions of taking turns, and that they may show early behavioral problems. So one of the things that's really interesting about aggressive behaviors, and you can read more about this online, is that aggressive behavior is relatively stable over time. It's about as stable as your IQ over the course of time. So therefore, one of the things that becomes interesting is we can identify from an early likelihood the likelihood of people actually being aggressive. In fact, high school dating behavior is highly predictive of what will happen at the early marriage stage in terms of domestic violence and the like, and I've presented on that in different topics. One of the things I highlighted before is that deviant peer associations become really kind of problematic. And therefore, one of the things that becomes interesting is have they aggregated? Who are the peers? Are there any kind of pro-social peers? And then if you're going to make a violent behavior, you really need the help of the school system and the juvenile justice system, so it'd be good if you want to make a violent youth that you suspend them or you expel them, okay? Or you don't kind of provide kind of effective interventions along the way. That you do things as a school system that is problematic. I was really distressed by the fact that some school actually suspended a student, an African-American student, because he had certain kind of hairstyle. Now, that's a good way to teach people, about how to become animosity towards the school, of alienating the parents. If I were a principal of school and there was a student who had certain hairs that I don't like, that's a golden opportunity. I would invite that student to do a presentation to the school on how he chose that hairstyle, what's the history of that hairstyle for that particular group. Why is it that we, the educators, see the students' behaviors as provocations and threats, as not meeting our standards? Not only would I have this student give this presentation to the thing, I would play the music from Hair in the background. How do we not make things worse? I listened to the Republican convention, nominations, and I was aghast when someone running for the presidency actually said that transgender youth, that this is a mental health illness, it's a mental disorder. What are you talking about? Transgender youth have 7 times the likelihood of depression and suicide. The absence of LGBTQ support systems actually increases depression and loss of life. How could you be to save life using abortion rules, but not care about someone who's now a teenager? I can go on and get on my soapbox on the degree to which principals can make schools more socially acceptable. How are you respectful of the rights and privileges of each? Okay, if you go to the next page, I'm just going to walk people through what they can read on their own. So if there's any merit to what I'm talking about, these are all kinds of effective interventions from early childhood on. There are various kinds of nurse practitioner, parent practitioner programs about how to have homeschool nursing early on in order to teach parents to be more effective. There's the reading literacy, there's school presentations. There are various kinds of emotion regulation programs, So one of the things is we now have an idea about how to make a violent youth. If you go back to my black box notion, I want to know in your black box of the school, I want the reporter to report on the school on how many of these things they had in practice. Now, obviously, this will never happen, right? Because there are lawyers waiting to sue the school system for not implementing these gold standards. But can we create a program where we get the lessons to learn not only about the perpetrator, about the environment they came from, okay? In fact, if you kindly turn all the way to page 34, Christina, one of the things we know about effective schools is parent involvement. You know what is the most effective school system in the United States? That even among high-risk kids, they have the highest performance for reading, math, social behavior. It turns out that military schools that are on military bases that deal with the children of those dual parents have the most successful outcomes. And one of the things they do is they engage parents. In our book on nurturing independent learners that you will see in a moment, we have included a checklist. So when parents don't show up for parent night, when parents are not engaged in some way in the education of their children, we have put together this checklist. And Christina, if you just scroll through the next pages, I will ask you, the educators, to take a look at these pages on pages 34, 35, and ask yourself, how many of these items does your school do to engage parents? Why is that an important element? So instead of blaming the parents for not showing up, has your principal, have you as educators taken these kinds of initiatives? I've included in your handout, going back to the work on depression and trauma and so forth, some examples of that kind of program. And once again, each of those could constitute, and in fact, if you go on to the Melissa Institute or Meichenbaum Donald Melissa Institute, you could read detailed handouts on how to assess for suicidality, how to provide interventions for depressed and suicidal patients, how to conduct trauma-focused interventions that are evidence-based rather than being filled with hype. I'd like to conclude with one line of research that we have engaged in that I'm very proud of. And in fact, you can go to page 39, Christina. Bear with my jumping around. No, we need to go to the 3D model. Maybe it's the page before it. Okay, there you go. Okay. You know, not only am I interested in what makes someone an expert teacher, I'm also interested in what makes someone an expert educators. We all know that the ability to teach is a challenging one, and that some teachers are better at it and achieving better goals than others. So a colleague of mine named Andy Beamill and I actually wanted to study the question about why smart children keep getting smarter and other children fall further and further behind. So that when children enter school, they're given their reading comprehension and their other kind of school readiness, they differ by anywhere from 1 to 3 grade levels in terms of preparedness to learn, naming colors, counting, evidencing turn-taking behavior, and all of that. But over the course of their schooling, that initial split gets bigger and bigger. So by the time a teacher has these students in their class, those students can differ by anywhere by 3 to 4 grade levels in terms of academic performance. Now, how did they get that way? Okay. So we actually studied, you'll see a reference to a book called Nurturing Independent Learners, students who in fact achieve. They're not just smarter, they seem to do better academically. Okay, and in fact, you'll see this book, Nurturing Independent Learning, and then this model that we have, we actually put on the cup of teachers. I don't know if you ever been into a teacher lounge and they each have a cup. I swear, I think things are growing in their cup. Okay, so once they went through our training, which I'm about to describe, we actually gave them a new cup with the model. So let's go back and let me explain the model and its important implications for how you conduct training. So what is it that you do for a living as a teacher? Okay, so one of the things you do is you actually try to teach students to do more and more difficult things, starting with simple and then moving on up. You know, you may do math problems or writing comprehension or literacy kinds of things or other things that you test on. You know, just think of you're trying to, I don't know why you would do this, trying to teach a high school student how to drive a car, right? Or do a sport or play an active thing. You're trying to move them up. Let's say you're learning to teach them how to downhill ski. So you start on the simplest hill and then you move to the more complex hill. And then if you want them to practice, on a hill that's slightly above their current level of ability so that they can actually develop not only the performance skills, but the thinking processes that go with it. So one of the things we do as educators is we try to move people along the x-axis. But not only that, we need to move them up to the y-axis because they're going to start off as a novice, just in this kind of acquisition phase of the thing when they're learning a skill. And with deliberate practice and feedback, they're actually going to automate that skill. And what's important about automating a skill, I mean, you could think about you learning any particular skill here, is that with that automaticity of the act, it actually frees up cognitive capacity. So you can actually get people using deliberate practice with feedback to consolidate the skill, okay? You know, what you need to do is to not only teach a skill and have them challenge themselves, but you want them to get up to the point where they not only know how to do the skill, not only do they know how to do the skill and perform it, but they can actually teach it to others, okay? That is, if we want to make someone an expert, a clinician, a student, an educator, you need to put them in a consultative role. They need to own the skill, okay? And not only can they teach it to others, but they can monitor it on their own. They have a variety of mentalizing metacognitive processes. They could have a goal, plan, do, check. They could do the SNAP program when they get a trigger. They need to own the skill. I don't know if you've ever had someone, when you had a computer problem, and you go to someone for help. I mean, I do this all the time, usually to my grandchildren, right? And they come in, they fix the problem. And I say, don't go anywhere. Just sit right down here. And I have to explain back to them what it is that they want me to do. I have to be able to cognitize the nature. I need to own the skill. What do expert therapists do? What do expert educators do? That first of all, they have to move people along the x-axis, and they got to also move them up the y-axis. But your job is not done. Because not only do you want your students to be able to perform the skill, the social skill, the academic skill, you want them to be able to apply it in new and creative ways on their own, okay? You know what that is? That's the z-axis. And there are two ways to move people, your students, along those axes. You could do what is called authentic task. You could throw them in a shop where you're fixing cars and they have to problem solve and learn what it is that they used, okay? They have to, or you could start off on a near transfer and slowly move them out further task. What have I just done? I have explained in some ways to you what an expert teacher does. So we train student teachers on how to perform these tasks. And not only that, as noted on page 31 of your, if you just go ahead there, Christine, to page 41. I can't read it. 31, I think it is. Yeah, okay, that's what I need. So in order for you to get a mug, okay? And you're going to take that mug into the teacher's lounge. And people are going to say, where'd you get that mug? That's a nice kind of mug. How do I get one? And then not only that, what the hell is that XYZ? So my teachers, to get the mug, have to explain to their colleagues, see this mug? The XYZ? That's what I do for a living. Not only that, this is what you do for a living. You see, what I do is I try to have my students move along from simple to more complex problems. That's what the X is for. You know, I engineer my curriculum. Not only that, in some of my classes, I actually lay out various math problems and people can choose. It's like asking my students which hill do they want to go down. And not only that, I not only do that, I actually move them from when they're sort of a novice to the point of becoming more proficient. I provide deliberate practice regularly with a kind of feedback. I want them to consult. I want them to be able to not only do the task, but to teach the task to others. I want them to be able to be their own teacher. I want to put myself out of business, you know? I'm a really good clinician when I can turn my students, my clients, into becoming their own therapist. Okay. And not only that, I want to do it in a creative way. So we have done research in order to teach teachers these kinds of tasks. And not only that, when they instruct their students, they could explain what this class is about. They could explain the XYZ model and what we're going to do this session. Here's the best thing that happened. When we trained teachers to do this, and they invited us back in the classroom, they had the students bake a cake, a beautiful white cake with frosting. And on the middle of the cake, they had the XYZ. And we watched the kids eat the cake, and they were ingesting our model. What is it that you do as a teacher? What does the expert teacher do? Is it some variation they do the XYZ? Can we go back, Christina, for one final comment to the picture of the 3Ds? Yeah. So what is it that leads kids to fall further and further behind, okay? It's because they're constantly being confronted by tasks that are beyond them on the x-axis. Not only that, they rarely have an opportunity to get feedback because they're moving on to another topic. And they really are asked in classrooms by peers or teachers about how did you solve the problem? How do you use think aloud with students? So in the Nurturing Independent Learning's book, we now amplify, and you can Google and order the book and so forth. We can now amplify how to apply this to each and every academic task. Okay. This has been an impossible task for me. I have 15 hours worth of presentation on this. And I'm trying to get it into an hour and a half. And I hope that this introduction to the resources of the Melissa Institute, to our mission. In fact, we're a nonprofit, so if you think that this and the other material is of value to you, that you will in some way support and spread the word. that you will share the materials that we put together. And moreover, that you will be on the lookout my legacy course. The 10 hours of CEU credits will be charged $150. I have arranged for all of the proceeds from my legacy course to go to the Melissa Institute. Last 28 years, I've had the privilege and honor of being research director of the Melissa Institute, of working with Lynn and Michael Atman, Melissa's parents, and to turn their loss into a social good. For 28 years, we have worked science away. I hope that this presentation is yet another further contribution. I would be delighted and honored for you to submit questions, reactions, and responses to this presentation.
All right. So we do have a question here, Don, for you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. And what evidence-based individualized strategies are most suitable for implementation at a school level to support high-risk students who exhibit emotional and behavioral disorders, have a history of expressing violent and homicidal ideation, and come from backgrounds of trauma?
If you go to the Melissa Institute, you will get a more comprehensive answer than I'm about to give now, given the limited space. Essentially, what you need to do is, first of all, ensure that there's safety. That should be your most important immediate priority in working with the students that we're talking about. And it's not only in the safety assessment in terms of suicidal ideation and plans for this. So there's a whole section, I give a whole day workshop on how to treat suicidal and adolescents and the like. So safety is the first concern. I have a former student of mine, Jalen Asano, who works with exactly these kinds of kids. And one of the things she has found out is that in 25% of the cases, the parents of these high-risk students do not get rid of guns in the house. So my first concern is the degree to which their safety. The second concern that I have therapeutically is, how did this student come to see you now? What's the nature of your connection with that student? How do you probe for suicidal ideation, which is pretty common, actually, okay? There are 42,000 suicides per year in the United States, 18,000 of which are adolescents and the like. And this is going up. So what I need to do is make you, the educator, cognizant of what are your ability and who can you refer this person to, and what will be the ongoing collaboration between you, the educator, and the healthcare provider, especially in terms of assessing that kind of thing. There are a variety of alternative ways that have been effective for working with suicidal patients. Apropos of my concern about height, you need to know that there's no one procedure that's better than other procedures. There's no one technique, so a lot has to do with what lingers from that early childhood experience. What's the nature of the supportive environment? And most importantly, over and above everything you told me about this kid, what I have not heard is, what is box 6? Does box 6 characterize anything? Does this kid have any particular strengths, islands of competence, any kind of social connections? Are there any particular protective factors that we could build upon? So while this is a really challenging and important question, okay, I encourage you to check out my more detailed presentation. Safety first, therapeutic alliance third. knowing your limitations and working in collaboration with a healthcare provider. 4th, okay? And then I can go through a variety of alternative interventions I'd be prone to use. Let me see if that answer gets close to their particular concerns.
Thank you very much, Don. We're going to be calling into the bringing into the screen Dr. Amanda Alvarez from the Nicklaus Hospital team, and who so graciously also agreed to be part of this. And we had asked the folks at from the public school to prepare some cases that perhaps we could discuss and talk about a little bit more. I know, Don, you read the description of the cases, and thank you, Amanda, for joining us.
Thank you, Amanda.
Now,
thank you for having me.
I wondered if you're so kind and quickly go over the case, the one case that we thought we could talk a little bit more, and we'll have a conversation between you, Don, and us on the case.
Yes, of course. So Christina's going to be screen sharing the case, so I'll briefly read through it. So the case is about a student that is 16 years old. She's a Haitian American who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, and with a recent episode of depression and anxious distress. So there is no history of developmental delays. She doesn't have any medical problems. She lives at home with both her parents and a younger sibling. There's no history of substance abuse. However, there is a history of sexual abuse that was reported. The mother of her daughter reported that her daughter suffered from depression and anxiety for several years and received therapeutic treatment, but it's been unsuccessful due to several Baker Act admissions. The mother reports that her symptoms have progressively gotten worse. She's become more oppositional, argumentative. She loses her temper, becomes easily annoyed, is often angry and resentful, refuses to comply with adults, follow the rules, deliberately annoys people, upsets others, blames others for her mistakes, and is often vindictive. The parents state that they've also had to lock drawers and hide knives for her safety. The student reported that she's been admitted to the CSU multiple times and has been extremely depressed and anxious. She's missed school a lot due to these admissions as well. She also hasn't been able to get over the death of her paternal grandfather. She mentioned that she's unsure of her sexual orientation. She's also engaged in inappropriate sexual behaviors, as well as non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors, such as cutting, for the last 3 years. She displays the following: so a history of multiple Baker Act admissions for suicidal ideation with attempts via overdose and running in front of a car, thoughts of suicide, frequent sadness, feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness, low self-esteem, self-injury, lack of enjoyment in social activities, low energy, isolation, crying, nervousness, feeling that something bad is going to happen, excessive worrying and fear of abandonment, a pattern of unstable, intense relationships and impulsive and high-risk behaviors. And she was referred to a wraparound team. So this includes a therapist, a case manager, family coach, a peer support specialist for the assistance in the following goals that are stated there.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, go
Because we
ahead.
only have a limited amount of time.
Yeah.
Given my discussion about the case conceptualization model, what stands out in your presentation so far that I would have said, oh my God, that's a potential box 6? She has a special affiliation with her paternal grandfather, right?
Yes.
I would have a heyday with that. I mean, that for me gives me hope. You know, I mean, you can go back, given this history with her, and pick out a variety of psychopathology. You can say, sexual abuse. Can you tell me about the sexual abuse? Okay. Yeah, you ran in front of cars. Is that serious something you're going to do? Okay. So we as clinicians who have a pathology bias can conduct multiple sessions with this young girl. Okay. And the key question is, A, how did she get there? Is there any connection between the therapist who's seeing her and that? And then I would say, did you say something about a kind of paternal grandfather? Would be, so I'm just supportively curious. That's my clinical style.
Yeah.
So I would say, tell me who this grandfather is. And what is it that you saw him that made this so important that it still lingers? You know, I would have whole sessions with her, not on the psychopathology. Surely I would do things about risk assessment. But I would have a whole field day on what is it that stands out from all the relatives? What did he do? Okay. Because what she's going to do is she's going to tell you, the therapist, how to conduct therapy. She's going to tell you how to be the paternal grandparent. Okay. And remember, your ability to develop that therapeutic alliance with her is going to be the critical component. And not only do you think, I don't know, this is a tough question, I'd say to her. Do you think he had those feelings towards you? What do you think he saw in you? And here's an odd thing, you know, after a while, I would say, if your paternal grandfather, what was his name? Were actually sitting in that chair, what can he tell the two of us about who you are as a person? You know, behind the depression, the anxiety. I want to get to who you are so you could see how I use strengths as a key element of my therapeutic stance. I'm unlikely to get more. She's had so many treatments. She's told her story. So this is her identity, is your report, okay? I want to know what your report's going to look like in 3 sessions after you've engaged the paternal grandfather. I'm curious about your reactions to that, but that's the way I conduct therapy with these high-risk kids.
No, I definitely think that makes a lot of sense. It's probably something that I know that it mentions that she was admitted to a SIP program, so it's probably something that wasn't as, talked about in that program. They were probably focusing a lot more on the risk, on getting her back integrated into, more outpatient therapy or more intensive programs outside of residential. So I definitely think that would be a good approach as well. She also mentioned there that she has like strained family relationships. So I wonder if that also has anything to do with.
Yeah, you're right on target. The other thing that we need to capitalize on is that the students we see who have this kind of history are experts in treatment. So I always say to these kids, I'm going to ask you something really crazy and difficult, okay? And I'm not even sure you can help me. You be her for a moment, okay? And I'll be the therapist. I'm always trying to improve in how to help kids who've had such a background. I'm always trying to learn, so given that you've had so many different kinds of treatment settings and so many people have reached out to you, would you mind if I ask you, can you tell me, is anyone in the past been a good therapist? And moreover, what did they miss? If you came in as a consultant, so I take advantage of the fact that the kids I see are more expert about the system than I am. So I actually try to put them in a teaching mode. And if they're really good, I might even say, this is crazy. Have you ever thought about going into mental health, helping other kids? So I'm always into box 6. We're all really good into boxes 1 to 5. You had other cases, I listed them, the kid who wants to do math problems, the one who feeds the animals, the one who marijuana, the one who has a boyfriend, the one who has been described as resourceful. So what would lead my colleagues to call you resourceful? What the hell did they pick up on? Okay. So my job as a clinician is to have a resilient mindset. Remember, my goal is not to get depressed. Okay. My goal is to make sure that I can help this kid have hope, some sign of the future, that their history is not their destiny. Okay. And I will never give up on these clients or on the students. I will always look for some way to turn what it is that we do into a positive attribute. You know, not only that, how the hell do you put those locks in your hair? Are you crazy? I mean, how much time does, I mean, you know, instead of seeing this as a confrontation or provocation.
Yeah. And I definitely see.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I definitely see, you know, a lot of these kids live in environments, you know, either at home or at school in their social groups where it's like chronically invalidating. And we know that a lot of these kids with that invalidations that can lead to like pervasive emotional dysregulation. So if, you know, us as clinicians or, you know, school counselors or people in the school systems can kind of be that, you know, leading person for them, it could definitely make a difference.
So I'm going to leave you all with my favorite clinical question. Okay. So my favorite clinical question is the following. I say to whoever I see, doesn't make any difference. Let me ask you something a bit different, a bit unusual. See if it makes any sense. Do you, the client, do you, the student, ever find yourself out there in your day-to-day experience, asking yourself the questions we ask each other right here? That's a very clever question. Do you, the student, do you, the client, ever see yourself out there in your day-to-day asking yourself the questions we ask each other right here? My job as an educator and a therapist is for them to take my voice with them. My job as a therapist is to put myself out of business and have them become their own therapists. My job as an educator is to get them to own the skill, okay? My job as an educator is to nurture hope. My job as an educator is to help them develop a resilient mindset. I want to thank all of you once again for joining us. I look forward to our additional session at the clinic meeting later today. And I hope that you will access and that you will support the Melissa Institute. Once again, bear with my obsessive compulsive academic pursuit of inundating you with handouts, websites, and please visit and support the Melissa Institute. Thank you for your attention and interest.
Thank you, Don, for this wonderful experience. Thank you, Amanda, for being so brave to join us live for this discussion. And for the benefit of the many people who are watching that are not from the region, this afternoon, we're going to be meeting with folks from the Emotional and Behavioral Disability Clinical Services to have a more in-depth discussion about different cases that they're working with, and the team of the Nicklaus Children's Hospital will be guiding them through a process there so that they get boots on the ground feedback on how to manage some of the things here in the Miami area. I'm very grateful for everybody who attended the meeting today. Keep in mind, as we had said a few times, that everything that the Melissa Institute does is done for free. The only thing that we ask is that you consider donating to us, and that you definitely integrate this into the way that you work in your life, both at professional life and your personal life, to help us create a safer and healthier world for all. Thanks again, and looking forward to seeing you at our next session, which I think will be coming up on the 6th of December. We're going to have Dr. George Bonanno from Columbia University talking about trauma and related matters here with you. Take care. Thanks.